My name is Ashwini Deshpande. I'm a professor of economics at the Delhi School of Economics at the University of Delhi in India. And I've been working lately on the economics of discrimination with a focus on caste and gender disparities in India. But I've also worked on aspects of the Chinese economy in the past, and my PhD is on international debt, so I've worked on those kinds of issues as well.
What attracted you to the fellowship? Because it sounds like you've been doing this kind of work, India-China work a lot. Why did you apply?
Well, interestingly, I haven't done a lot of India-China work, so I really haven't looked at a comparative picture in terms of these issues that I've been studying, except for one exercise in which I compared India, China, and Bangladesh in terms of gender discrimination at the workplace. So that's actually the only comparative paper that I've done. But as I said, I've worked on aspects of the Chinese economy intermittently in the past. But my main work has been on India. And somebody recommended this fellowship to me, saying that, and especially this year because the theme is prosperity and inequality. And that kind of fits in with a lot of my concerns, both in terms of international debt, foreign capital, as well as issues of discrimination and what underlies inequality and things like that. And I had just begun to read about ethnic minorities in China in terms of the sort of discrimination against them and so on. And I thought that this fellowship might offer me an opportunity to do some comparative work, which actually I haven't really done. So that was primarily my objective in applying for this fellowship.
And what kind of impressions do you have of China or Chinese, just from your daily professional life?
Well, in one word, it's fascinating. I mean, I've been to China a couple of times, and of course, I went, very recently, like about 4 or 5 years ago, by which time China had made huge economic progress. So I was struck by how different the two countries were, in fact, in terms of just economic, standards. So if you go to cities like Beijing or Shanghai, you get a sense of almost, being in the first world or the industrialized Western countries. I mean, they are superbly organized, etc. But at the same time, you see a lot of poverty. You read about other issues of related to inequality. I also got a chance to visit, say, Kunming, which is on the western side, and that obviously wasn't as well developed as Beijing and Shanghai. So it seems, you get a very clear sense of a country in transition. And it's fascinating to see some of the forces that get unleashed because of that process. And that, kind of prompted me to study it. So China is not my main area of interest, but China has always been an intermittent area of interest. And so I've revisited China, issues on Chinese economy every now and then. And this seemed like a good time to get back to China.
Also, you haven't been there for the last 4 or 5 years.
I think I either went in 2002 or 3, I can't remember exactly, but yes, some time around then. And from what I've read and from what I can imagine, there have been lots of changes even during this period.
Have you had Chinese colleagues before, or have you worked with Chinese colleagues in your past?
I have not worked with them directly in the sense of, like, I haven't collaborated with any Chinese colleagues, but I have certainly met a lot of Chinese scholars, because I'm also associated with this Institute for Chinese Studies in New Delhi, and they get a lot of Chinese visitors. So I have interacted with some of them, and also during my 2 trips in China, one of them where I actually did field work. I stayed there for a month and did field work.
Where were you doing field work?
Well, I was mainly doing fieldwork in Kunming. I was comparing Kunming, which is in Yunnan province, with Wuxi, which is in Jiangsu province. Uh-huh. So they are cities of similar size, but at two different ends of the country. And I wanted to see regional inequality through, locally, what it means really for regional inequality locally. So I stayed in these 2 cities for about 15 days or so, talking to people, visiting factories, going to the special economic zones in Wuxi, talking to individuals at different levels of government, organizations, party officials who were willing to talk to me, of course. and trying to understand the patterns of regional inequality. But that was at the time when China had not entered the WTO, had not formally joined the WTO. So one of the questions that I was asking them was what they thought the impact of Chinese entry into the WTO would be in terms of regional inequality and in terms of their lives. And I got, I mean, for somebody who, I mean, I didn't stay there that long, but I got very good responses, and I wrote a paper called The Tale of Two Cities. So that was a kind of a longish visit, and the other visit was in connection with my gender discrimination work. So yes, I have met with individuals, both academics as well as non-academics, in China, and also Chinese outside in India.
And now you have a chance to go back and see what happened after WTO.
Exactly.
What are some of the things that you notice on a daily basis about China that you find interesting from an Indian perspective?
That's a little bit difficult to answer because unfortunately the news that reaches outside is a little bit lopsided. It's either about super achievements of the Chinese economy, or sort of statements of leaders of the Chinese government and so on, or it could be something that's like, for instance, that's going on now, which is a stolen video from an Australian on the Tibet question. So you get only these two kinds of news. I wish there was a way of getting kind of daily news from China. Maybe you get it, but I mean I don't keep track of it on a day-to-day basis. But you actually don't get that much daily news about Chinese life or society outside. I think it's still either tightly controlled, or maybe it's in Chinese and we don't get to understand or read about it much. But the Western press only reports just these two kinds of things. One is all about censorship and dictatorship, or it's about leaders, statements of leaders and some treaty that's been signed or something like that.
And you felt the way it's the same way Indian media also portrays it very similarly than the Western media?
I think Indian media is a little bit better. I think the English language, particularly the English language press in India, is surprising as it may sound. I think it's more balanced and more informative than, for instance, the media in the United States. So we get to know much more about the world reading Indian newspapers than I would ever get watching CNN or reading some local newspaper. I mean, New York Times and Washington Post is different, but very few people actually read that on a daily basis. So the kind of news that you get on a daily basis, I've been watching the news every single day, and all I know about is Obama's passport files have been, somebody broke into them, or what's going on in basketball. I really don't know what's going on in the rest of the world. So in India, I think we would get much more news, but I think there might be issues about what kind of news filters out. So I think there are issues at both ends.
Well, during your visits in China, then what if now that you're going to have a chance to go back again? What would you think were the more important questions that you're going to ask that doesn't get asked?
Well, my individual interest continues to be discrimination and etc. So I have some insights through my work in the Indian context. So I'm going to try to examine those questions also when I go to China, try to meet some officials and try to meet scholars who are working on this question, and try to understand patterns of discrimination, but especially vis-a-vis the ethnic minorities. I don't want to focus on Tibet because it's like almost like an individual question, separate in its own right, and also because it's been studied a lot. But I really want to understand what it means to be a minority and outcomes in education, employment, and also the Chinese government has a strong affirmative action program vis-a-vis the minorities, which is hardly known. People don't know about it, or rather, very few people know about it. So, given that I also work on affirmative action issues in the context of other countries, India, the US, etc., I would like to understand a little bit better the affirmative action program in China. Except that the Chinese fellows, my colleagues here, the fellows who are here, said that it's going to be difficult because these are considered very sensitive matters, and people may not be willing to talk to me about these questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they would be able to advise you, but sometimes it seems like it's the word choice rather than the topic that you know, if you say the word discrimination, maybe they will be sensitive, or maybe if you say another word.
Exactly, yeah.
If you go around it, then you can actually get this.
Yeah, so I mean, in fact, what I was telling them is that instead of saying are minorities discriminated against, if I could pose it positively, saying that the Chinese government has taken a lot of steps to help the minorities, and I want to understand that. So sometimes it works if you go the other way around, and then you can get insights into discrimination, but from the other side. So now they've told me that if I could just formulate a few questions that I would be interested in asking, if I could send like a short note to them, to the Chinese colleagues here, then they could use that note and set up meetings for me when I go to China.
That's fantastic.
So I'm hopeful. I don't know. It may come to nothing. In which case, that's that. But I'm definitely. So I'm not. This is not a. I'm not talking about the project that I'm going to be doing, which is a different thing. But this is really my own area of interest, which I will definitely pursue.
Absolutely. But you also have a multi-country perspective too, right? This is not just India-China comparison.
Not at all. No. In fact, for instance, I worked on a book earlier, which came out some years ago, about transnational comparisons of group disparities in different countries. So I know that this is not a problem unique to India or China or to the United States, but several countries in the world have such problems that are related to group identity or group disparities, and that affirmative action measures are prevalent in countries in order to combat inequalities that come because of affinity to groups. So it's an interesting, it would be an interesting, I mean, I already have done some comparative work on affirmative action, but just that China was not a part of that story. And I would very much like to. So there is some English language material available on this topic, but it would be great if I could, instead of just relying on that, if I could just talk to a few people and get my own assessment.
Other things that you kind of, it's just a random question. Other things that you hope that will surprise you?
Maybe, because I think on paper, for instance, if you look at the Chinese affirmative, it's a pretty strong program. And especially given whatever little I've read during the Cultural Revolution years, where the minorities were completely, not vilified is not the word I'm looking for. But basically, they were told that they were at a very primitive stage of development, and that they without I don't think the word barbarian was used, but there was those kinds of portrayals of minorities. So I think from that time to now, government policy towards minorities has come a long way in terms of recognizing, the basic problems that minorities face, and for a state that's kind of known for its, dictatorship or authoritarianism or whatever, at least on paper, the measures seem to be fairly sensitive. So, but as we all know, in all countries, you can have a very good-looking policy, but when you see its operation on the ground, I'm not hoping for spectacular answers, in the course of like 2 visits or something. I know that that's not going to happen. But even if I can begin to understand the process a little bit, perhaps I could develop this as a larger project at some later date and see where it goes.
That's good. So what do you think of the process so far, as far as the residency is concerned?
It's great. It's one of the things I was struck by is how nicely and how effortlessly the group has bonded. Especially when you reach a certain age, it's not easy to just make new friends, and it's okay to have like a small conversation over dinner at a conference or whatever. That's different. But when you're living with a group of people like day in and day out, and you meet them at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, sometimes you could be in a situation where you really don't want to see them again. I mean, basically, we're all adults and have some professional experience, so we are pretty much set in our ways, and things like that. But given all of that, and given the diverse backgrounds, or perhaps it's because of the diverse backgrounds, I don't know. Perhaps it's because of the diverse backgrounds, I think, that we are able to get along, and it's not like we're competing with each other for some prize or something. And so I think we are not treading on each other's toes very much, and it seems to me that there is a very good exchange of ideas, conversations, and also fun. I mean, that's a very important part of the process. Because personally for me, I mean, if it's just, serious talk 24 hours a day, I mean, after one day, I'm ready to quit. But it's nice that, we can laugh and we can sing and all of those things. And, so we can do all of these things. And yet, when we come to the sessions, we're all serious about our work. And so I think it's a nice balance of both things. And, maybe this is just specific to this one group, but at least for our cohort, our group, I think that most, all of us are bonding. And what is really nice is that although people have now kind of, gone into different groups in terms of their work, but if you notice at the informal spaces like, meal times or whatever, there's a lot of mixing. So it's not as though people are just looking for that one person to talk to or something, so it's nice that whoever's sitting next to you, you have something to say to that person. And it's a very conducive atmosphere, I think, to building research partnerships. It's a very important part of research, I think, which is I think it's kind of behind the scenes, so you don't really kind of realize it, but it's important to have a very positive relationship with the people you're going to be working with. Otherwise, you'll end up working, of course, but it'll be a bit of a drag. Whereas this way, it's fun. You enjoy doing it.
That's nice. Right? Ladies done?
Pretty much, yeah. Is there anything else? That was very good.